Can you tell us what the origins of Stop the War were and how you managed to build the largest demonstration that has ever been known?
So I'll try to keep it fairly short. And, you know, I've been listening to some of the other speakers, and, you know, we've got a great history in the labour and trade union movement in this country, and the socialist movement in this country. And I think the anti-war movement has played a very big part in that. And I think it's interesting that these things, you can never see them as totally separate from other things. I mean, I didn't pay my poll tax. I was involved in all sorts of campaigns before that, going back to the late 1960s. And I think particularly I was influenced over questions of war and imperialism from a young age, when I witnessed the apartheid South Africa, and when you witness the Vietnam War and various other things that went on. And I think that's true for a lot of people. I mean, I remember when I was at school, the CND movement was a big movement in the late 50s and early 60s, and again in the 1980s. So of course these all feed into the movements that come up at a particular time. And when we set up Stop the War in 2001, I think what it did was, firstly, it was a response to a very big world crisis, which was the events of 9/11 and the aftermath of 9/11. We knew then there were going to be very big ramifications from those events, particularly a new era of wars, as we saw in Afghanistan, Iraq, and later in Libya, Syria, Yemen, and these wars are still going on. So it was about drawing together the different elements of the left and the peace movement in Britain, which took some doing. I mean, we had a very big meeting initially in Friend's house in London. There were also meetings in other parts of the country, but this was a huge meeting of over 2,000 people. We had another room which was an overflow, and then we had hundreds of people outside on the pavement who were addressed by the speakers as they went out. Jeremy Corbyn was one of the speakers at that initial rally. So was Bruce Kent from CND. I chaired it. We had a whole number of different speakers who were very important to us. People from the peace movement, people from the trade unions, and people from the left. Well, I think, so that was a hugely successful meeting, and everybody said, you're not going to get this because there's so much of a backlash after 9/11 towards the left that you're just not going to be able to do this. But we did do it. The following week, we had a organizing meeting of about 400 or 500 people just came to this activist organizing meeting, which was very fractious and acrimonious and loads of different ideas. And of course, lots of people didn't know other people in the movement. So it was very important that we did get all those people together. But out of that, we did establish a coalition, which we still have today, the Stop the War Coalition. Eventually, CND, we worked, not initially really, but eventually we worked with them much more closely, particularly from 2002, 2003. And of course, we opposed the war in Afghanistan, and we got a big demonstration against the war in Afghanistan. But well, I say big, 50, 60, 70,000. So it was a substantial demonstration, but of course, much smaller than what we got later on. The whole of 2002, the first half of it, we were told that we couldn't get. Lots of people said there won't be an attack on Iraq. This is just saber rattling by Blair and Bush. We were pretty convinced, and of course, history, if you look at the documents since released, we were pretty convinced they had made up their minds, as indeed they had made up their minds by March 2002. What we managed to do then was to construct a kind of, if you like, a coalition of the different groups, the peace movement, the left and the trade union movement, and the Muslim community, which is incredibly important to us and remains incredibly important. I know there's a kind of narrative that the Muslim community, you know, is communalist or isn't particularly left-wing. And of course, like any community, it contains a whole range of politics. But we found in that community a huge commitment to opposing the war, but also a huge level of engagement. Interestingly, Tommy Sheridan talked about the number of women involved in the poll tax movement, but this was also true about Stop the War, and many of those were Muslim women and were and remain very, very important to our movement, to the Palestine movement today. And I think one of the things that they linked was the whole role of imperialism and war with the racism and Islamophobia that they experienced in this country. So bringing those different movements together was something that hadn't been done before, previously. And in some countries, you still have, you can have a pacifist peace movement, Muslim peace movement, and a left peace movement. And one of the things that we did was to say, no, we don't want to divide these things up. We want to bring them together. How did we do that to get to this massive march? Well, to me, always, that happened in 2003, but 2002 was the key. Just a couple of events. I spoke on a demonstration in April 2002, which was about the massacre in Jenin in Palestine. Interestingly, we've had all the conflict in the last few days in the same area, and the killing of Shireen, the well-known, very famous journalist from Al Jazeera. But that was a demonstration which I would say was 95% Muslim. Muslims from all over the country, very, very big, probably 100,000 people on it. One of the tasks we set ourselves was, how do we link some of the people who came on that with the campaign over Iraq? And in September 2002, we had a demonstration, which to me, I always think was our most important mobilizing, not because it was the biggest, but because it led to 2003. And that again brought together for the first time the Muslims who'd campaigned over Jenin. The CND people were involved in very large numbers, and the Stop the War Coalition, which was based on activism and groups around the country. So all of that was important. We had something like 300,000 people on that march. And I remember the BBC reporter saying to me, aren't you really surprised how big it was? Because they had no idea. And we didn't think it would be 300,000, to be fair. But that meant we had the chance to get an even bigger demo, which we agreed to do. And that also we went international with it. We went to the Social Forum in Florence in November 2002. And of course, there have been the events in Genoa, the huge anti-capitalist protest in July 2002, where a demonstrator was killed. And we agreed there would be an international day of action. Big argument, would it be February 15th or January the 18th? We'd settled on February the 15th. It's estimated 30 million people marched around the world, including into the 2 million in London, plus 80,000, something like that, in Glasgow at the Scottish Labour Party conference, which I'm sure Tommy was on. So those were the things that led to it. Just a couple of other points I'd like to make about them. Firstly, when you talk about these movements, people always look at it from the top. We had two former African presidents on our march in 2003. We had Ben Bella from Algeria who was speaking. A very nice man called Kenneth Kaunda came up to me and said, I was the president of Zambia. I'd like to meet you and hello. And he didn't speak, but was very welcome on the march. You had all those sort of tops, all the celebrities and well-known Jesse Jackson and all these people who spoke. But those demonstrations aren't made by those people. They're made by what thousands and perhaps hundreds of thousands of people do on the ground. They book coaches, they give out leaflets, they put resolutions from trade union branches, they hold meetings like this. And that is the crucial difference to winning the arguments and beginning to get these arguments across. The final point I'd like to make is this, that people always forget this, but of course in 2003, it wasn't just about the Iraq war, that demonstration. It also had a slogan, Justice for Palestine. And it seems to me that was a statement, not just of support for the Palestinian people, but that we understood this isn't just about one war, it's about a whole system, about the way the Middle East is oppressed and is kept down. So all of those questions, I think, are still relevant today. We didn't stop the war, but I think we did a lot to change pro-war opinion. I think there's now a strong anti-war sentiment, even when you have the kind of barrage of government propaganda over the war in Ukraine, for example, that you also have people who are very skeptical about more escalation and who don't want militarism, don't want more arms spending. So that remains very, very important for us. And I'll end it there, Crispin. So thanks very much.